Over the last 6 decades, the Dallas Cowboys have had great wide receivers. Dez, Lamb, Cooper, Irvin, Hill, Pearson, Bullet, Hayes, Austin, and Owens. But in the early to mid-60s, there was a Dallas Cowboys star who was the trailblazer for the Cowboys at a time when racism ran rampant in American sports culture. Before Hayes ran his way onto the scene from the Olympics, Frank Clarke, the original speed goat, was the first superstar at the wide receiver position in franchise history. For almost half of a decade, he dominated the position and elevated the wide receiver position of America's team to heights that no one saw then or after.
Frank Clarke. The Steelers are completely fooled, and Frank races in to give the Cowboys a quick score. It's 7-0 Dallas.
He was the first dominant Cowboys offensive player in history, the first Black American anchor in Dallas, Texas history, and the first Black analyst for CBS. In 1960, after spending some time with the Browns, he was drafted by the Cowboys in the 1960 NFL expansion draft.
Frank Clarke, a fine offensive end, brings 3 years of NFL experience with him from the Cleveland Browns.
Clarke's first season wasn't that noticeable, but that was only because there were few passes thrown his way. But when Landry did target Clarke, he was spectacular.
This is the story of a brand new team on the Texas scene, the Dallas Cowboys. Little Eddie LeBaron, the smallest man ever to make the grade as a pro quarterback, gives the Dallas Rooters another big boost as he connects cross-country with Frank Clarke to put the ball on the Steeler 10. Third period, Eddie LeBaron uncorks the Cowboys' money play. Frank Clarke gathers in the long rollout pass, and in the race to the goal line, Frank's an easy winner. Now it's 13-12.
You wouldn't believe the numbers he put up on just 9 receptions that season. 290 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he averaged 32 yards per reception. 32 yards per catch is insane. In Dallas' first game ever, he had 75 yards on just 2 receptions versus Pittsburgh. The following week, he had a 75-yard touchdown versus the Eagles in week 2. He had a 32-yard touchdown the week after. The first 3 weeks of the season, he was already considered a dangerous deep threat for the new franchise. Although he didn't get a lot of targets that season, Landry knew he had a star in his hands. So in 61, he picked it up.
The Dallas Cowboys, who failed to find victory in their first NFL season, opened their second with a tough assignment, the Pittsburgh Steelers.
The first game of the year versus Pittsburgh, Clarke had 98 yards and a touchdown.
More than 23,000 turn out to the Cotton Bowl. Don Meredith sets their minds at ease in the first quarter. Don retreats and fires to Frank Clarke. The Steelers are completely fooled, and Frank races in to give the Cowboys a quick score.
Week 4, he had 3 catches, 91 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 30 yards per catch. A week later, 3 catches, 87 yards. And within 6 weeks headed toward the end of the season, he had 292 yards and 4 touchdowns. But it wasn't until the last game of the season that he started to find himself and dominate his opponents on a superstar level. In week 14 versus the Redskins, Clarke had 159 yards and 2 touchdowns on just 4 catches. The guy averaged 40 yards per catch. Those are Randy Moss numbers or some John Madden stat line on a video game. He ended the season with 919 yards on 22.4 yards per catch and 9 touchdowns. If teams didn't know who Clarke was before the 1961 season, they did now. Landry had his first superstar on offense. The next season in 62, Clarke would start an era of dominance that no other receiver in Cowboys history would see until 6 decades later.
Another reason for the fine play of the Cowboys was the sensational season of Frank Clarke. Frank takes a Don Meredith pass against the Redskins. Frank shakes off 2 Indian defenders, then hightails it to the end zone for one of his 14 touchdowns.
The very first game of the season, Clarke put together another video game performance. He had 10 receptions, 241 yards, and 3 touchdowns. In week 3, he had 130 yards and a touchdown on just 4 catches. The week after, he had 3 receptions, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The week after that, 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. The next week, Clarke continued his dominance by scoring 3 touchdowns against the Steelers. He ended the 62 season as the league's leader in touchdown receptions. It was the first 1,000-yard season in Cowboys history. Now, wait a minute. Think about that for a second. Clarke had 14 touchdowns on just 41 receptions. That's almost unheard of. Let's put this into perspective even more. It took Dez Bryant's 88 receptions in 2014 to get 16 touchdowns. Terrell Owens had 15 touchdowns on 81 receptions. CeeDee Lamb had 12 touchdowns in 2023 on 135 receptions. Clarke had 14 touchdowns on 41 catches. 41. Had Clarke received a double of the targets he had that year, he would have obliterated the touchdown record. Clarke had 9 games with 70 or more yards. In terms of value, that season was the greatest value of a receiver in Cowboys history and arguably the best season of the decade. From the last game of the 61 season versus the Redskins, up until week 6 versus the Steelers in 1962, Clarke had 7 consecutive games with a touchdown, a record that still stands today. He nearly tied his own record again in 63 when he had a touchdown in 6 consecutive weeks.
Looking for 82, Frank Clarke. Touchdown. On and 10 now as we pick up the action at the 24-yard line. Over the middle to Clarke. He scores. 50-yard line. Meredith comes right back, this time to Frank Clarke.
In week 6 versus the Giants,
Yankee Stadium again as the hard-riding young Cowboys of Dallas come into New York's home of champions.
which was the 3rd-ranked passing defense in the league, Clarke shredded the Giants for 168 passing yards and a touchdown.
It's the Cowboys' ball in the second quarter, and they boast a long scoring arm in Eddie LeBaron. A long, lofting throw to Clarke, who catches it on the run and then turns on the steam. A 75-yard touchdown play that puts Dallas out in front, 14-7.
He put up video figures again. Clarke was one of 2 receivers who had 800 or more yards with under 50 receptions. The unique aspect of Clarke was his amazing combination of size and athleticism. He was the first big fast athlete at the wide receiver position in history, listed as 6'1 or 6'2, wearing nearly 220 pounds of straight muscle.
Scores here against the Steelers.
Clarke was bigger than Michael Irvin, but was arguably the fastest receiver in the league. He was a phenom, a specimen that we hadn't seen before. He ran his routes with aggression and violence. If defenses played close up, he was physical and had great technique to beat his defender at the line of scrimmage. If they played back off, his blazing speed took it the distance.
Frank's an easy winner. Now it's 13-12.
The guy was something amazing. By 1964, Clarke was a bona fide star and was widely considered as the best deep threat in football and one of the best all-around receivers in football.
Looking for Frank Clarke. He's running a good corner pattern. Clarke is open and takes the ball. Ronnie Medved there, but just a second too late.
He ended the year 2nd in the league in yards among wide receivers. In 1965, the Dallas Cowboys caught the league by surprise when they drafted an Olympian GOAT. To have these 2 phenoms on the same team was supposed to change the league. Had it gone Landry's way, he could have revolutionized the league 2 decades earlier. Clarke was moved to the tight end position and immediately became one of the best tight ends in the league. During his only season as a tight end, he was 3rd in the league in yards among all tight ends, while Hayes was 4th in the league in yards. Dallas was 3rd in the league in passing touchdowns and in the top 10 in passing yards. Dallas had 2 of the most explosive players in the league on offense on the same team. What could have been?
Later in the 4th period, the Dallas Cowboys are in possession. Meredith passing to Clarke. With seconds remaining, Meredith retreats and throws to Clarke in the end zone for the touchdown.
I think this is the first time that I can say Landry wasn't really sure what to do with that kind of talent. Unfortunately, for reasons that aren't clear, Clarke faded away in his last 2 seasons and eventually retired in 1967. His last game was the Ice Bowl, where he hardly had any playing time. Clarke went on to become a trailblazer even off the field. He was the first black anchor in Dallas media history. He was also the first black anchor at CBS. Clarke was a rare talent that set ablaze Texas at a time when Dallas didn't have that much to celebrate. Physical, fast, and athletic, he revolutionized the league and paved the way for the Hall of Famer Bobby Hayes. Bob Hayes, who is arguably considered the greatest deep threat receiver in history, once credited Clarke as the person who taught him how to catch the deep pass. Unfortunately, Clarke is a forgotten legend who is hardly ever brought up when the greats are celebrated. You can't write the history of the Dallas Cowboys without talking about the first superstar receiver on offense in Cowboys history. Before Michael Irvin steamed road through Texas Stadium, before Heal the Thrill thrilled audiences, before Pearson's catch of faith, before Dez put up the X and Austin shocked the world, and before Lamb became an assassin, it was Clarke who defined the position of the wide receiver in Cowboys history. Frank Clarke, may you rest in peace. And if no one else is it, I will. you will always be a Cowboys legend. Until next time, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.